I secretly recorded my sister's wedding toast to prove she was a monster, but the playback revealed a truth so dark it shattered our entire family. I, Gina 26F, have always felt like a ghost in my own family. A faint, blurred impression next to the high-definition, glittering portrait of my younger sister, Ida. Our lives were a study in contrasts that our parents, Michael and Sarah, never tired of highlighting. I was the art teacher, my hands perpetually smudged with charcoal or clay, my income a modest, steady trickle that funded a small apartment filled with second-hand books and thriving plants. My happiness was quiet, internal, and, to them, utterly invisible. Ida 22F was their masterpiece. A prodigy of finance, she had marched through business school not with a thirst for knowledge, but with a ruthless, calculated precision, treating her classmates as future contacts and her professors as stepping stones. Her engagement to Mark, a hedge fund manager whose smile was as cold and polished as marble, was the crowning achievement. Their union wasn't about love. It was a merger, a consolidation of assets and social capital. The favoritism was the wallpaper of our lives. A pattern so familiar you stopped seeing it, but it was always there. Family dinners were interrogations for me and victory laps for her. Ida closed a deal that netted her firm 6 figures in commission. My father would announce, his chest puffing out with pride. Then his eyes would shift to me. And Gina managed to get paint out of a student's sweater. So there's that. My mother would pat my hand, a gesture that felt less like comfort and more like pity. We're just so glad you found something you enjoy, dear. The wedding was to be their magnum opus. A spectacle at a country club so exclusive the air itself felt expensive. I was roped into being a bridesmaid, a role I now see was meant to be my final demotion. A member of the supporting cast, visually signified by a peach-colored dress that was both infantilizing and hideous, making me look like a confused guest at a Southern Belles cotillion. The weeks of wedding planning were a masterclass in psychological warfare from Ida. Every interaction was a tiny paper cut. She'd send me texts at midnight. Reminder, your makeup trial is tomorrow. Try to look like you're at least trying to be happy for me. She rejected 3 drafts of my toast, scribbling criticisms in the margins like a ruthless editor. Too personal. Too emotional. Can you just be normal for once? The final straw was the rehearsal dinner. Under the soft, flattering lights of the restaurant, she pulled me aside, her hand vice-like on my arm. Gina, she said, her voice a syrupy whisper that didn't match the coldness in her eyes. I know you have a tendency to be overly dramatic, to make things about your feelings. So for tomorrow, let's just eliminate any chance of that. He pressed a crisp index card into my palm. On it were 3 typed lines. Ida is a driven and wonderful sister. We're so happy for her and Mark. Cheers. It was a script. A gag order. She was so terrified that my authenticity would crack the flawless veneer of her day that she was willing to reduce me to a mouthpiece, reading words emptier than a corporate mission statement. The condescension was a physical blow. In that moment, the years of being sidelined, of my accomplishments being met with a pat on the head while hers were met with parades, coalesced into a cold, hard knot of resolve in my stomach. I would not give her the satisfaction of a fight. Not there. But I was done being silent. Back in my hotel room, the sounds of laughter from the dinner party echoing faintly down the hall, I did 2 things. First, I opened my laptop and I wrote. I wrote the toast I wanted to give. I poured onto the screen every ounce of pain, every memory of Christmases where my handmade gifts were met with a polite smile before being set aside to fawn over Ida's expensive store-bought ones. I wrote about the loneliness of growing up in the shadow of a sibling who was actively encouraged to eclipse me. It was raw, angry, and profoundly true. I knew I'd never have the courage to deliver it. So I did the second thing. I devised my proof. I opened the voice recorder app on my phone, its icon a simple red dot that felt like a weapon. I tested it, placing the phone on the desk, speaking softly, playing it back. The audio was clear. My plan was simple. I would deliver her pathetic three-line toast. I would be the meek, obedient sister she demanded. But before I walked to the podium, I would start the recording and leave my phone discreetly among the floral arrangements. I would capture the aftermath. I needed evidence of the snide remarks she'd make to Mark, the whispered insults, the real Ida that existed when she thought no one was listening. It was the only way I could ever make my parents see the monster they had created and adored. The wedding day was a suffocating marathon of satin and insincerity. Ida was a vision of cold beauty, every hair in place, her smile a practiced flawless curve that never reached her eyes. She moved through the day like a CEO managing a particularly important product launch, critiquing the flower arrangements, the timing of the music, the angle of the photographs. Her gaze would occasionally find me, sharp and warning, a silent reminder to stick to the script. When the time came for the toasts, my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Mark's best man gave a speech filled with inside jokes about golf handicaps and stock options that elicited polite, confused laughter from half the guests. My parents spoke next, their voices thick with performative emotion. They spoke of Ida's astounding drive, her peerless success, and how Mark was the perfect addition to our legacy. The word legacy hung in the air, heavy and exclusionary. I wasn't part of any legacy. I was a footnote. Then it was my turn. The weight of the phone in my hand felt like an anchor. I walked to the podium, the rustle of my awful dress deafening in the quiet room. I made a show of adjusting the microphone, using the movement to place my phone behind a large arrangement of white orchids. My thumb found the record button. A tiny red light glowed, a secret I held against all of them. I looked out at the crowd, at my parents' expectant faces, at Mark's bored impatience, at Ida's steely gaze. I picked up the index card. My voice, when it came out, was flat and hollow, devoid of any emotion. Ida is a driven and wonderful sister, I recited, the words tasting like ash. We're so happy for her and Mark. Cheers. I raised my glass. A wave of perplexed, lukewarm applause washed over me. I saw the instant flash of fury in Ida's eyes. I had followed her orders exactly, and yet somehow, by being so blatantly robotic, I had still managed to undermine her. I had created a moment of awkwardness in her perfectly curated day, and that was an unforgivable sin. I retrieved my phone, stopped the recording, and walked back to my seat on numb legs. For the next hour I was a ghost again, drifting through the reception. I clutched the phone in my small beaded clutch like it was a holy relic or a hand grenade. The need to listen was an unbearable itch. Slipping out of the main hall, I found a deserted alcove overlooking the manicured gardens, the distant sounds of the band and laughter a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. I fumbled with my earbuds, plugged them in, and started the playback. I fast-forwarded through the muffled sounds of my own voice, the scattered clapping. I heard the band strike up a bland jazz standard, the murmur of conversation swelling. Then, clear and close to the microphone, two voices. Ida and Mark. They must have been standing right by the podium. What the hell was that, Ida? Mark's voice was a low, angry growl. He said she was under control. That was a disaster. She made us look like idiots. It was barely a coherent sentence. A sharp, dismissive sigh. God, relax, Mark. Don't get your cufflinks in a twist. She's just jealous. It's what she does. She's always been pathetic. Couldn't even write her own toast without my help. I knew she'd find a way to make this about her. She's a narcissist, just like her father. The air left my lungs. Her father. The words didn't make sense. They bounced around my skull, meaningless and terrifying. My father? What are you talking about? Mark sounded as confused as I felt. Michael? What did he do? A cold, melodic laugh that sent shivers down my spine. Oh honey. You think Michael is my biological father? God no. My real father was a man named Arthur Brennan. A millionaire investor. Mom had a torrid little affair with him when I was 2. Michael, the poor schmuck, found out. But he was too weak, too terrified of being alone and looking like a failure to leave. Mom stayed for the stability, and he stayed because his pride couldn't handle the world knowing his wife preferred someone else. The only reason they've bankrolled my entire life, this wedding, my education, everything, is because Mom feels guilty and Michael is too much of a coward to admit I'm not his. He's been playing the proud father for over 20 years. It's pathetic. Gina is his though. His little failed carbon copy. A constant reminder of the man Mom chose to stay with, not the man she wanted. I slumped against the cold stone wall, my legs unable to hold me. The world tilted on its axis. The garden, the music, the distant stars. Everything blurred into a nauseating swirl. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a payoff. A cover-up for a decades-old secret. My entire life, my entire sense of self, was built on a foundation of lies. Every slight, every comparison, every time my father's eyes had glazed over when I talked about my art, it wasn't just disinterest. It was resentment. I was the living, breathing reminder of his humiliation, while Ida was the prized relic of my mother's betrayal, showered with money and praise to keep the truth buried. I heard Mark let out a low whistle, a sound of perverse admiration. No shit. So the old man isn't your dad. And he just bankrolls it all? Takes it. Why wouldn't he? We have the perfect family image to uphold. It's all about the brand mark. Always has been. Gina never understood that. She's always chasing authenticity and real connection. He spat the words like they were poison. It's why she'll always be a failure in their eyes. She's a constant reminder of the weak man Mom settled for. Now come on, we have guests, to schmooze. Their footsteps faded, leaving me alone with the devastating truth echoing in my ears. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold ground, the rough stones scraping through the thin fabric of my dress. I was a ghost who had just discovered she was also a pawn in a game she never knew was being played. I pulled out the earbuds, the silence that followed somehow louder than the recording. I stood up on shaky legs, smoothed down the ridiculous peach dress for the last time and walked away. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just left, driving home in a daze, the recording saved and backed up to the cloud a dozen times over. The next day the expected fallout began. My phone erupted. Text after text from my mother. How could you be so selfish? Your behavior was appalling. You ruined Ida's perfect day. Your father is heartbroken. Was that your goal? Your father. The words, once a term of endearment, now felt like a cruel joke. I didn't respond. I let the messages pile up, a digital monument to their hypocrisy. I needed to be calm. I needed to be strategic. This wasn't a sibling squabble anymore. It was an excavation of a life-sized lie. 3 days after the wedding, I drove to my parents' house. The air inside was thick and still, like a museum after hours. They were sitting in the living room. My mother on the edge of the sofa, back rigid, my father slumped in his armchair, staring into a cold fireplace. The disapproval was a tangible force. Gina, my mother began, her voice clipped and formal. We need to have a serious discussion about your behavior on Saturday. It was. Before we do, I interrupted, my voice quieter than I intended but steady. There's something you need to hear. It's about the wedding. I placed my phone on the coffee table between us, the polished wood reflecting the dark screen. I found the file. I took a deep breath and tapped play. Ida's voice, crisp and venomous, filled the silent room. Oh honey, you think Michael is my biological father? God no. The transformation was instantaneous. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her face bleaching of all color, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. But it was my father's reaction that shattered me. He didn't move. He didn't gasp. He just continued to stare into the fireplace, but his shoulders slumped as if under a tremendous weight. The anger drained from his face, leaving behind a landscape of pure, profound grief. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. As if a secret he'd been clutching for 24 years had finally been ripped from his hands and played aloud for everyone to hear. The recording played to its devastating conclusion. The final words, "She's a constant reminder of the weak man Mom settled for," hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. The silence that followed was the most deafening sound I had ever heard. It was my mother who broke first. Her sobs were not gentle. They were ragged, ugly gasps. She had no right. That was a private conversation. Gina, how could you? How could you record that? This is a betrayal. How could I? The words tore out of me, my own composure finally cracking. How could you? All of it. My whole life. You let me believe I was less than her. You let him believe I was less than her. You made him live with this ghost, and you took it out on me. All of it was a lie. Michael finally turned his head to look at me. The pain in his eyes was so deep it was physical. Gina. His voice was a dry, broken whisper. He cleared his throat, tried again. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times over the years. But the shame, and your mother, we thought we were protecting you. Protecting the family. Protecting me? I cried, tears streaming down my face now. You were protecting yourselves. You built a perfect, beautiful cage for Ida and you left me outside in the cold, and you made me feel like it was my fault for not being pretty enough to be let in. You made him resent me for existing. What followed was a long, painful excavation. Hours of tears, shouted accusations, and decades of repressed poison flooding the pristine living room. My mother, between sobs, admitted to the affair with Arthur Brennan, a powerful, charismatic man who had promised her a different life. She admitted he had died suddenly in a car accident years ago, closing that door forever. The money, the trust fund, the lavish gifts for Ida. It was all from him, a final endowment for the daughter he never really knew. Michael admitted he'd known since Ida was 3. A nagging doubt about her features, a throwaway comment from a relative, had led him to a clandestine paternity test. The result had broken him. He stayed, he said, for me, because I was unquestionably his and he couldn't bear to leave his real daughter. But in staying he had to swallow his pride every single day. He had to pretend to adore the living symbol of his wife's betrayal, and the bitterness of that performance found its outlet in the one person he didn't have to pretend with: me. I was his daughter, so he felt he could be authentically disappointed in my life choices. With Ida he had to perform love, and the effort of that performance made him cold and distant from us all. It was a horrifying, twisted logic that had poisoned every Christmas, every birthday, every family dinner for as long as I could remember. I left their house that day feeling like a bomb disposal expert who had successfully defused a device only to be left standing in the crater it had been buried in. The family I thought I knew was gone, obliterated. In the weeks that followed, the fragile facade crumbled into dust. Michael moved out. He filed for divorce, telling my mother he had spent half his life living her lie and couldn't spend the rest of his life listening to it. My mother was utterly shattered, vacillating between blaming me for dragging up the past and weeping over the loss of the perfect life she'd curated. Ida's reaction was predictably vicious. She called me, screaming that I was a jealous, conniving bitch who had engineered the entire situation to destroy her out of petty envy. She didn't deny a single word of the recording. She was only furious that her meticulously constructed image had been exposed as a fraud. She immediately cut off all contact with our mother, blaming her for the original sin, and with Michael, whom she now coldly referred to as that man I used to call my father. Me. I was left alone in the rubble of my own history. I started therapy, trying to untangle the knot of betrayal, grief, and identity crisis. My relationship with my father, Michael, is now a fragile new thing. It's painfully awkward at times, filled with long silences and the ghost of his past resentment. But it's honest. For the first time, we are trying to build a relationship based on truth, not on a performance meant for someone else's benefit. I never intended for it to go this far. I just wanted a sliver of evidence, a tiny recording to prove my sister was unkind. I never imagined I'd pull on that single thread and unravel the entire tapestry of our lives. But as I sit in my quiet apartment, surrounded by my art and my plants, I realize something. The family I thought I had was a beautiful, empty shell. It needed to break. The truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could set any of us free. We can never go back to the way it was. Now we have the agonizing, hopeful task of trying to build something new from the pieces, something real, something that finally belongs to us.